This is not a drill.
This project is named Project China Lives.
We are living in the beginning of massive extinction of book readers.
Our literature is breaking down.
Youth like us are creating movement to initiate. We can still fix this. You can still fix this.
You can still fix this.
Wait a minute!
Let's go back where lead starts.
Good day. I am here to discuss about the history of China. Intellectual life developed in significant ways during the Shang period and flourished in the next dynasty, which is the Zhou Dynasty, around 1040 to 256 BC. So the China's great schools of intellectual taught about Confucianism, legalism, Taoism, Maoism, and others. It is all developed during the Zhou Dynasty. So the intersection of migration, amalgamation, and development has characterized China's history from its earliest origins and resulted in a distinctive system of writing, philosophy, art, and social and political organization and civilization.
The Shang Dynasty is the earliest ruling dynasty of China to be established in recorded history, though other dynasties predated it. The Shang ruled from the 16,000 to 1046 before Christ and heralded the Bronze Age in China. They were known for their advances in math, astronomy, artwork, and military technology. The earliest written records in Chinese history date back to the Shang Dynasty, which, according to legend, began when a tribal chief named Tang defeated the Xia Dynasty, which in 16,000 before Christ was under the control of a tyrant named Jie. The victory is known as the Battle of Mingqiao, fought during a thunderstorm. Jie survived the battle but died later of illness. Tang is known for establishing a low number of drafted soldiers in the army and for beginning social programs to help the kingdom's poor. Shang literature represented by the text of oracle bones, bronze inscriptions, the Pangang chapter of the Book of History, and the Odes of the Shang Dynasty in the Book of Songs are the first group of literary works to have been written down in Chinese history, and the first that can be reality attested through the interaction of archaeological texts and those handed down over the centuries. Now, what type of writing did the Shang Dynasty use? The Shang people who lived over 3,000 years ago etched characters, pictures onto bones. Shang writing is known as oracle bone script. Other ancient scripts such as Egypt's hieroglyphics fell out of use, but oracle bone script developed into the modern characters which Chinese people still use today. Did the Shang Dynasty have written records? Oracle bone scripts in the Yingsu Museum in Anyang. The Shang Empire spread along the Yellow River basin primarily. The Shang capital was Anyang. It was the first dynasty with written records, inscriptions on bones and bronze objects. The Shang made many contributions to Chinese civilization, but four in particular define the dynasty: the invention of writing, the development of stratified government, the advancement of bronze technology, and the use of the chariot and bronze weapons in warfare.
So now, let's tackle about the Zhou Dynasty. The Zhou Dynasty was followed by the Shang Dynasty. The Zhou Dynasty is the longest reigning dynasty in the Chinese history, and it was divided into two periods. The Western Zhou, which lasted between 1045 BC to 771 BC, and the Eastern Zhou Dynasty was lasted between 771 BC to 556 BC. The Zhou Dynasty had 40 known emperors, which was twice the number of the Shang Dynasty. The Zhou Dynasty started when a man named Wu overthrew the tyrannical Shang Emperor, and Wu became the first Zhou Emperor and established a central government that structured on both sides of the Feng, or also known as the Feng Hao. However, Wu died shortly after his reign and lasting only for 3 years. Wu's brother Dan took control of the government as a regent for the Wu's young son. The Emperor Dan, aka Duke of Zhou, became a legendary figure in the Chinese history due to his famous book of the Divination, and Dan expanded the territories eastward and ruled with great respect. When Wu San came of age to rule as King Chen of Zhou, not every region was pleased with his policies, and rebellions broke out. A centralized government that could not maintain the large territory to the ruling house sent out the trusted generals, the family members, and other nobles to establish a smaller state which should be loyal to the king. The policy of Fengjin, which means establishment, was instituted, which decentralized the government and the allotted land to nobles, feudal system, and social hierarchy. The ranking and following in order, which the king, nobles, gentries, merchants, laborers, and peasants. The Fengdian policy was very successful in producing an abundance of crop wealth and cultural advancement, such as more sophisticated bronze work and literature. However, this peace and prosperity did not last. Western Zhou fell when envisioned likely by the people known as the Chiron, or wrong established the region. The nobility moved the capital Luoyang in the east, which gave the next period of Zhou history its name of Eastern Zhou. The Eastern Zhou dynasty was much more chaotic and violent in nature. The warfare was endless during this time because of the equal power of states, and it became a way of life. The famous book, The Art of War by Sun Tzu, it was written during this time, recording the precepts and tactics to gain advantage to the opponents despite of the violence. The Eastern Zhou still managed to produce literary, artistic, and philosophical works. Between 476 to 221 BC, the state of the Qin reached an all-out war against the Zhou dynasty and conquered each state one by one, eventually overthrowing the Zhou dynasty, uniting China, and establishing the Qin dynasty.
The next topic is Han Dynasty. Han Dynasty. The Han Dynasty was one of the great dynasties of ancient China. Much of Chinese culture was established during the Han Dynasty, and it is sometimes called the Golden Age of ancient China. It was an era of peace and prosperity and allowed China to expand to a major world power. Then, when was the Han Dynasty? The Han Dynasty ran for over 400 years from 206 BC to 220 AD. It was the second imperial dynasty after the Qin dynasty. It was followed by the Three Kingdoms period. How did it get started? The Han Dynasty began with a peasant revolt against the Qin emperor. It was led by Liu Bang, the son of a peasant family. Once the Qin emperor was killed, there was a war for 4 years between Liu Bang and his rival Shang Yu. Liu Bang won the war and became an emperor. He changed his name to Han Gaozu and established the Han Dynasty. Next is the major advances of Liu Bang, who is the founder of the Han Dynasty by Miyuki. The period of the Han Dynasty was a time of invention and science. One of the most important inventions was paper. Paper allowed the government to easily keep records and pass on instructions throughout the empire. Also important in the history of the Han Dynasty is the method of recording words such as poems. Brushing characters with ink is archaeologically attested to during the Han period, including on silk, hemp paper, and bamboo slips. And another important legacy received by the Han poets was the shuchai, genre of poetry with innovations in some of its verse forms such as varied line lengths, a body of material which was expanded by further additions of Han poets, and then published in an edited anthology. And then, one of the major forms of literature during the Han Dynasty was the fu, sometimes translated as rhapsody, a kind of eclectic grab bag of prose and verse, not easy to classify in English as being either a poetry or a prose. In Chinese, the fu is classified as wen rather than shi. However, these terms do not correspond to English categories of prose and verse. One of the differences in the traditional Chinese categorization being that she was sung or chanted, whereas the fu was not, at least according to the Han Shu. The credibility of this being enhanced by the fact that one of the compilers of the Han Shu, or also known as the Book of Han, or History of the former Han Dynasty, was Ban Gu, who was himself a practitioner of the fu style. The development of the fu form of literature during the Han Dynasty shows a movement toward later more personal poetry and the poems of reclusion, typical, for example, of Tao Yuanming, the 6th dynasty's poet.
Chinese literature shows the history of China, both social and political. The chaos of the past dynasties makes unified China impossible to ever happen again. The background of China and its people reflected in their pieces reveals that they experienced good and bad weather. Life tested them to its best. Year 618 to 907, Tang Dynasty begins and is called the Golden Age of Chinese civilization. Let us start with their government. Emperor Tai Chu 618 to 626 CE granted equal amount of land for male taxpayers, continued local government rule, created monetary system of copper coins and silk ribbons, wrote set of laws. Let us proceed to another, which is Tai Chu around 626 CE that replaced the first emperor. This is the golden age of China begun. It maintained numerous political policies, provide economic relief for farmers and in case of disasters. He also implements civil exam based on merit. During the beginning of 150 years of Tang control over the region, results in the improvement of the government and successful invention of woodblock printing and gunpowder. The Tang Dynasty also helps to expand the influence of China and continuously communicates to Afghanistan, the Byzantine Empire, Persia for exchange of goods and ideas on Silk Roads. Emperor Wushu tried to eliminate the Buddhists from 843 to 845 CE by taking control of their wealth that lasted only a short period of time. Buddhism never recovered, that began a conflict between Chinese and foreign traders. Changes in attitudes of Chinese started here. The late Tang Dynasty came years after the death of Tai Chu and became a golden age of art and literature for Chinese. The Tang Dynasty is a dynasty of poetry and the finest of Chinese literature. Let us now proceed to the poetry and poets of Tang Dynasty. Chinese lyrical poetry reached its height inspired by the scene of natural beauty. Tang poets wrote about the fragile blossom in spring, the fallen leaves in autumn, or the changing shape of the moon. Just like the pieces of Li Fu, the conversation in the mountains. Next is A Meeting by Tu Fu. Lu Shi, regulation poetry, developed during the Tang Dynasty and still popular even in the present, consisting of 5 and 7 syllabic verses with a definite rhyming scheme, with all even lines rhyming together and in the presence of the tiswara in every line. First 4 lines consisting of Jing, which is sin, and the rest are Qi-ing, which is emotion. Let us proceed to Tai Chu, truncated poetry, shorter version of Lu Shi and popular during Tang Dynasty. Contains of 4 lines, but within its 20 to 28 syllables or characters, there were pictures of natural beauty. Lastly, the newly made poetry form, which is to have fixed lines and length according to definite rhyming pattern and tonal pattern, putting new words to popular melodies that usually from the foreign origin. The prose of Chinese literature. Chief Master Han Yu advocated return to simple and straightforward writing in classical style. Because of Han Yu's effort, political and philosophical treatises, informal essay, tales of the marvelous were all written in the neoclassic style, while vernacular tales attempted to spread religion, wrote Buddhist story for the common people in colloquial language, and evolved a form of narrative known as bianwen, and marked the beginning of popular fiction in China.